Good evening. You're listening to Adrenaline Radio. This is 1680 on your AM dial. I'm Fred Blanchard, your host for Adrenaline Motorsports. And this evening, I'm going to share with you folks a little bit about a personal project that myself and my partners have, and it relates to land speed racing. And I wanted to discuss some of the differences in various motorsports, and I'll compare it mostly with, say, like drag racing as an example. And why I mentioned drag racing is because the vehicle that we have, which is called a Lakester, kind of resembles a dragster in many ways, with the exception of the fact that it is totally enclosed. The engine compartment is enclosed. The driver compartment has a canopy. The driver sits in there just like a drag race driver. And the cars are basically about the same length. But the differences that we have in a vehicle of this kind, with the dragster, the goal is to accelerate for the quarter mile, and the chassis flexes, and it transfers the weight from the engine and puts the power to the rear wheels with a huge wing on the back, and it achieves a speed in the 300 mile an hour range, basically in the quarter mile. The cars are normally built pretty light, and I think a dragster pretty much weighs about 1,850 to 1,900 pounds, whereas a Bonneville Lakester, being the same shape and size pretty much, with the fact it's enclosed, has a lot of different components in it. It basically, you, instead of going the quarter of a mile, as most of us see on TV, pretty much, Bonneville's a different thing altogether. It's no longer the quarter of a mile. These vehicles run a distance of 5 miles for the best speed you can attain by your particular type vehicle. They contain 2 water systems, and what we have does anyhow. The one water system is completely for the engine, so we do run water in the engines, whereas a dragster doesn't run water. The purpose of it, of course, is to keep the engine as cool as possible within the normal operating temperature, which is about 280 degrees. The other water tank is really for what's called an intercooler, which a dragster does not have. The intercooler is to cool the fuel as it passes through the intake manifold underneath the supercharger, and that pretty much is what the intercooler tank is for. And prior to each run, those tanks are filled full of ice along with water. And because of the distance you run, you want to keep the fuel as cool as possible, and that's the intent. The other thing, even though both engines that we use in drag racing and also Bonneville racing look similar, they're really not. Again, our engines at Bonneville run water, and dragsters don't. We run different types of superchargers, where in dragsters they use a root-style supercharger, or currently I call them high helix, I guess, in drag racing. And in our particular application, we use what's called a screw charger, which was made some years ago, and I was fortunate enough to be on a team that was the first team to introduce a screw charger to any kind of racing at all. And with that idea, I decided that this is one of the components that we were going to have for our future component for our future engine. And so basically you've got the differences in that type of supercharger, and also the fuel injection is pretty much the same in both vehicles. We do not use as much fuel in what we do as they would in drag racing. Drag racing, they use an extremely large fuel pump that will use 11 gallons in that period of time, the 4 seconds that they run. In our case, we have the capacity of about that 11 gallons, but we'll probably only use 3, even for a 5-mile run. That's pretty much the type of fuel that we have. The differences also in those vehicles is that the weights of the cars, where, like I mentioned early on, the dragster would weigh probably 1,850 to 1,900 pounds, in that range. Our cars pretty much would weigh close to 5,000 pounds, because we have to add weight for the The cars will have a tendency at full speed to want to lift if you don't have that, and it has to be distributed properly. Of course, our car is a little bit different. If you wanted to base it on type of car that runs at Bonneville, the top runner at Bonneville obviously is going to be the Streamliner. The Streamliners are totally enclosed cars. They can run a single engine, multiple engines, various types of fuel, but basically they're a Streamliner class. And they have, again, various classes for various sizes of engines, whereas in drag racing and Top Fuel especially, it's just basically one size engine in one class, and that's basically the premier engine and type of vehicle that they show on television. Whereas at Bonneville, you're very fortunate. You have production-style coupes like your Pro Stocks would be. However, there's production-style coupes that have run at this point at 300 miles an hour, which is a little bit different than drag racing. Also, they have vintage roadsters, type like 34s, 1934 type roadsters, and 32s and 29s, and with an array of engines such as the latest model LS small block Chevys, Mopars like the Chrysler engines, or early vintage Dodge engines. And some run the high-performance engines, 4 cylinders and things like that. And that's kind of how Bonneville really started, was running back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. When you see photos of Bonneville back in the 50s, you would have pictures of just maybe 150 cars at best to be at that event for the whole week. The entries last year surpassed 560 cars, if I'm not mistaken. Not necessarily just cars, motorcycles of all shapes and sizes, and it had a mass amount of attendance as well. So it's kind of regenerated itself. It's become a very want to go to type sport, and it's for a whole week, and it's really an interesting project for someone to want to go there and see what's going on.